Greetings, it's Dan here and it's the 23rd of August. So here I stand at my allotment here in Essex in southeast UK, and today I'm going to be making a video on squash growing basics. I'm also going to include pumpkins in there with this as well. I've got many varieties of squash growing here and also some pumpkins as well. So we're going to have a little look around. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to grow great squash and pumpkins. So last year I made a more detailed video on the growing of pumpkins. I'll link that video in the description box below, and there'll be some other videos there as well. So anyway, let's get on with the video. But before that, if you like my work, please feel free to like and share the video with anyone you think might be interested. And if you'd like to be notified when I put up any further videos, please feel free to subscribe. So when you're growing squash, you need some fertile, well-draining soil or growing medium. So I do my allotment here in the no-dig style. I always put plenty of organic matter on here. So I've got some horse manure on the top here. Under that was some compost that I brought down here. I make my own compost as well. Got plenty of that hopefully to be able to put on here in the autumn. So just keep getting that organic matter in so that the plants have got plenty of nutrients there to make you some nice fruit. So when you are germinating your squash seeds, initially you want a nice warm temperature. 25 degrees C is great. That's around 77 Fahrenheit. So with regards to the month in which you sow your squash seeds, don't be in too much of a rush. We've all done it, myself included. Some of mine I started off in March. You really don't need to do that. Sort of like mid-May time is great for the climate round here. We're in USDA zone 8B here, southeast UK. Even if you ended up sowing them in early June, you probably won't have a problem. In fact, if you're in a cooler climate than here, where the frost can still come later, maybe even into June, you're probably better off waiting until around then anyway. So you really don't need to be in too much of a rush. Have a look at the different varieties, try and taste test some before you end up growing them, but there really are some lovely varieties. I've got some nice historical varieties down here as well, and if you look around you can find some really lovely ones. Summer ones which tend to be ready, unsurprisingly as it states, in the summer. I've got some over there, we'll look at those in the moment. And also you can get winter squash, which tends to be ready a little bit later, maybe around September, October time, but they can actually be stored into the winter, maybe even into the following year if they're stored under the right conditions. So that's absolutely wonderful. But anyway, let's have a look at some of the squash varieties I've got growing here, and hopefully you'll find something that you may wish to have a go at next year or in another year. So yes, later in the video I'm going to be showing you some squashes and pumpkins I've got growing in containers. So that will be coming up shortly. So the majority of my seeds for squash I get, in fact the majority of many of my seeds in general, I get them from a company called Real Seeds, realseeds.co.uk. I really rate that company. Have a look at their website. I'm not affiliated with them or anything like that. I am giving you a recommendation because I genuinely believe that they're a good company, and I'm sure you'll feel the same if you have a look at their website and read a little bit about them. But anyway, so this here, if I remember correctly, this is Hokkaido winter squash, which is a Japanese squash. So look at that, look, really nice, not ready yet. We've still got like a little green blush, if you want to call it that, on there. This will go more orangey when it's ready, but it's a nice squash. It's made a nice size, and apparently it's very well travelled, but originally from Japan, and a nice squash there. So I hope you can see this okay. So I think this is Sibley squash. So I'm growing two very similar ones, Sibley squash and blue banana. I'll show you that one in a moment. But look at that, not ready yet, but that's a nice squash there. Really intriguing shape actually, if you look at that. That looks really beautiful, and really looking forward to trying these. So with squash you can make like soups, things like that. You could put them in pies, and just, you know, or you can roast them, you can put toppings on them, really nice. But there's one for you there as well. So here's another Sibley squash here, and you see this one's smaller, so this will be ready a little bit later. So if I remember correctly from reading on the Real Seeds site, this was actually mentioned in a seed catalogue from around the year 1850, so certainly a historical variety. So here, I think this one is blue banana, which is from Guatemala, so a really nice looking squash there. Looks a little bit similar to the Sibley squash, so I am trying to be relatively accurate when identifying these to you, but certainly a nice squash there, and once again very much looking forward to harvesting this one. This won't be ready just yet though. So if I am correct, this is Victor winter squash. So I didn't actually buy any Victor winter squash seeds this year. I actually saved my own from crops from last year. So there we are. I can't guarantee that it's true to type, but I think that is what it is. I planted it here actually. It's one of my later plantings in this horse manure here. I just put the plant in and it's turned out to be a Victor winter squash, I think. So anyway, that's a nice one. If I remember correctly, this dates back to around 1897. So a very interesting variety, as I've stated. I've grown it before, and it's got a nice sort of mellow sweetness to it. A very nice one indeed. Someone made me some soup out of it last year from one I gave them, and it was certainly worthwhile. So with regards to squash, now this isn't ready. And a good way of working out whether a squash is ready is to look at maybe like the seed packet or the website where you got it from and have a look what a mature fruit looks like and see how close your fruit looks to that. And if that's a picture of a ready squash, pumpkin, whatever, then chances are yours will be ready. Another thing you can do is sort of try and put your nail in it or whatever. It's nice and hard. You want to make sure your squash is quite hard before you pick it. You don't want to pick it when they're soft because that could indicate they're not ready. But anyway, Victor winter squash, it's a nice variety. I've grown it before. Okay, so down here, I think this is Courgette. This will be a nice orange colour when it's ready. So you see these green bits here, they should turn nicely orange like that. If I remember correctly, this is a Japanese squash, and they may also be referred to as onion squash. I didn't get these from Real Seeds. I had these from another seed supplier that I think I purchased them last year. But anyway, a nice small squash like that. And once again, looking forward to harvesting these. Okay, so summer squash. This is early prolific straight neck. So one very good thing about summer squash is it can actually be on compact plants like this. So this is actually more like a marrow or a courgette plant as opposed to a squash plant. So look at these. So they are a summer squash, and what you do with these is you actually pick them whilst they're small. So I'm going to just use my secateurs. A knife would be better. I'm going to have this, what one shall I? Let's have the bigger one. Let's see, that's just readily coming off. Right, there we are. So early prolific straight neck squash. So these actually date back to 1938, so a very historical squash there. And as I stated, you treat this like a courgette or a marrow. So probably going to maybe even cook this up for tea tonight. So look at that, a nice vivid yellow colour, isn't it? Very ornamental, and the sort of novels on it are, you know, just add to the curiosity of it. And it's nice to expand what you're growing, because it's quite unlikely many of these varieties you'll find these down the local supermarket. You might find like Courgette or something similar to that, but you know, probably not something like this or some of the other ones. So it could be a really good chance to grow something that you just cannot get hold of very easily in the shops. So many of you are aware I love to grow pumpkins, so I suspect this is variety Pacific Giant, which I grew last year. So I actually saved some seeds from some of my pumpkins I grew last year, and I suspect that this is in fact a Pacific Giant with the regards to the shape. I did label them, but as you can see, they end up a bit of a mishmash how they all grow, but by the shape of it, looks very much like Pacific Giant, which is absolutely wonderful. So there we are. The heaviest one last year was over about 7 stone, so it certainly was a large pumpkin to grow. Absolutely wonderful. I can't guarantee this is true to type because I saved my own seeds, etc., and I just harvested the seeds from the pumpkins. There we are. But this one here, I suspect this is Dill's Atlantic Giant. So Dill's Atlantic Giant, very interesting. It was patented in the year 1979 by Howard Dill. He was a Canadian pumpkin breeder, and Pacific Giant was actually bred from Dill's Atlantic Giant. So quite interesting that this variety, if indeed it is a true to type Pacific Giant, is, you know, the child, if you will, or whatever, of the Dill's Atlantic Giant. And I've got them growing here together. Isn't that absolutely wonderful? But this one here is smaller. I'm suspecting this will be ready later, but either way, pumpkins are very good. I love them in soup, making lanterns, etc., etc. But yeah, I've got another one over there, but hopefully a good pumpkin harvest this year as well. You don't have to have big pumpkins. There's a variety called jack-o'-lantern if you want small ones, you know, to make little lanterns for children or yourself out of, whatever. Have a look about. Like with everything, you know, that I'm growing here, you know, grow what you want to grow and have a look at the different varieties, because there really is so much nowadays that you can grow, and you should be able to find something that floats your boat. So don't quote me on this one, definitely, but I think this is North Georgia Candy Roaster here. And that's from, and got to forgive my pronunciation here, Appalachia. There we are. So you can see that there. This was from a later planted squash plant, so it's a little bit behind, but quite happy with how that is doing there. The plant is quite happily making its way along here. Quite a big plant indeed, but yep. So one good thing about squash is, like many other plants, you can also stage your planting out. So let's say you do get some started early, you know, and you get them planted out, you know, as soon as you can after risk of frost has passed, and then maybe you could delay some for like 2, 3, 4, maybe even 4 weeks later, so you get like a successive supply of squash coming, if you will. That can be something you could consider doing, and that's what I did here. And down here, I think this is another blue banana. And this is another thing you can do with squash. You can probably see the Roma bean plants there. Haven't been very productive this year, but that's a subject for another video. But you know, so you've got your runner beans up high, and then I've got my squash plants trailing on the ground as well. Can be very good because that can help you sort of maximise space by occupying the different levels of growing. And once again, looking forward to harvesting this lovely squash when it's ready. So whilst we're on the subject, now I know it's not technically a squash or a pumpkin, but here I have a courgette. So this is variety Burpees Golden. It's a variety I've been very impressed with. So you can see by looking at this plant, you may remember that summer squash, early straight neck prolific. It very much was like this plant here. So I'll show you this one here, and once again that's just twisted off. It'll cut it like that. So that's absolutely wonderful, isn't it? So just cast your mind back to the summer squash, early prolific straight neck squash I showed you. Another good variety of summer squash I've grown before is Benning's Green Tint. Very historical once again, nice tasting squash. They look like little flying saucers. You may wish to look into that. But anyway, here we are. So Burpees Golden courgette, absolutely wonderful. These taste really nice, and this is probably destined for the dinner table over the next few days. So down here, now once again we have another courgette. Now these get a lot bigger than this. This would grow sort of right out here if I let it. They get really big. So this is variety Trista White, which is a Middle Eastern courgette, really nice. I'm incredibly impressed with these. So last year they did really well. I remember we had a lot more rain last year, and what the plants did, they literally walked. So this plant here, for example, would produce, then it'd layer, and then it'd produce again, and they really were prolific. So Trista White. Normally I wouldn't pick this, I'd let it get a little bit bigger. They could be good for stuffing or, you know, roasting and putting toppings on top, but just to show you it, there we go. So that's what they look like. They are a white courgette, very interesting. Once again, adding to sort of the variety of things you can grow. So yeah, certainly had quite an interesting year gardening wise. Had very low levels of rainfall around here, even by the standards of the southeast, which we can get some of the driest and longest summers here in the UK, but very, very low levels of rainfall. Actually, these pumpkins and squash, I've probably not watered them for maybe 2 months or so. I was watering them when they were establishing, but yeah, really almost neglected them, to be honest. But you can see they haven't done too bad. Squash plants, they like it warm, sort of a minimum temperature of about 25 degrees C, 77 Fahrenheit is actually great for them. And if squash plants go too cool, I can't remember the exact temperature, they can indeed stop growing. So a good minimum temperature, if you can achieve it, is about 20 degrees for squash. So a couple of days we were up at over 40 degrees C, over 100 Fahrenheit. And once again, these seem to have absolutely thrived and got lovely crops here. So very happy with how these are doing. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to now look at some squashes I've got growing in containers. So here we are in my garden. So I've got some squash here, variety Uchikikuri, growing in a container here. I have in this container here a Dill's Atlantic Giant Pumpkin, Marketmore 76 cucumbers. I've got a variety of courgette over there, and North Georgia Candy Roaster growing in a container over there. So these three larger containers here are actually dustbins that I was given a job, and they've been perfect for growing squashes in nice big containers. I drilled a hole at the bottom. The compost in these I actually made myself. I'm in the process of making the video of how I made that, and when I have finished making it, the video will go up, and I'll also link that video in the description box below here, but that won't be for a while yet. So anyway, I'll show you some of the fruits that are being produced here, and they're actually doing quite well. So let's have a look. So here in this container here, dustbin, so I actually planted 3 cucumber plants, and I've had a few cucumbers off of these so far. Let's have a look. So I'll show you what they look like. So there's one here, look. Market More 76 is a really nice outdoor cucumber. Very much recommend people grow that variety. One there, and there's one under there, and there are plenty more to come. So in this container here, there is where the Dill's Atlantic Giant Pumpkin is. So as you can see, this is not actually a giant pumpkin, this one. As you can see if I put my hand there, so it's a relatively small giant pumpkin. So of course something like a giant pumpkin really wants plenty of nutrients to get it to its full size, and of course I am restricting the roots by growing them in containers here. So it hasn't affected the size of the cucumbers, but certainly something like Dill's Atlantic Giant would want a nice area to spread its roots, more nutrients, etc. But if you want to grow pumpkins in containers, you certainly can, or squash. You might want to consider using or growing a smaller variety, maybe something like jack-o'-lantern that I mentioned earlier. But of course you can use bigger containers. We'll get into those in a moment, but let's have a look at some of the other squash I've got growing here. So this Uchikikuri growing here, the plant really has put out some growth. So we go all the way along here and we go all the way down here, and it actually grows out the other end just down there. I'm not going to show you too much because it's a bit untidy. But anyway, there's an Uchikikuri squash, so that's absolutely wonderful. And in that green container there, I have a North Georgia Candy Roaster growing out of it. Sorry if the camera work's not so great, don't have a lot of space down here. So plant grows out of there, and there is North Georgia Candy Roaster. So that's that's the squash there. So I'd estimate that this container here is about a 40-litre container, something like that, maybe high 30s, but certainly enough growing medium in there to produce this little North Georgia Candy Roaster squash, which is wonderful. And in this container here, this is about a 35-litre container, we have a courgette formed there. So I'd estimate that these dustbins are probably about 50 or 60-litre containers. So here we are down here. The light's not particularly advantageous, but I hope you can see this okay. So this is Dill's Atlantic Giant Pumpkin here. As you can see, still green. It'll start to go more yellow and then sort of orangey colour when it's ready. So more growth left in this. So growing in this container here, got some good quality growing medium in here, plenty of organic matter. This pumpkin's getting bigger and will get bigger than the one you saw in the dustbin growing, even though it's the same variety, because it's in a, this is probably about a 200-litre container, I would estimate, and there it is. So that's doing absolutely wonderful. So here we are. Now you can see I have some squash plants here growing in this container. So this is like something you'd get out of a loft, but very effective as a container. So growing two varieties in here. So I've got Oot Winter Squash, we'll show you, give you a close-up in a moment, and also Sibley Winter Squash, some of which you saw earlier in the video. So you can see by looking at this, the plant is looking a pale green. It's looking quite unhealthy, and I'm actually going to give it a feed today. So with regards to growing medium in here, this will be a good growing medium. I mixed it up myself. Plenty of organic matter in there, manure, etc. But squash are hungry plants, pumpkins, etc. And of course, two plants taking the nutrients out of here. They need plenty of nutrients. So what I'm actually going to do is give these a feed. So feeding, I really should have started doing it earlier on. Now none of the squashes, pumpkins, etc. you've seen I've fed at all. I haven't fed them at all, but this one here I'm actually going to, because I want to have as good a chance as possible as getting some good fruit, and I want the vines to be nice and healthy. So I'll show you what I'm going to be using. So here I've got Maxi Crop Extractor Seaweed Plus Organic Tomato Natural Fertiliser. Give it a good shake, and I'm going to be using 6 litres, sorry, 1 capful for 6 litres, so it's handily enough a 6 litre watering can. So just put that in there like that, and in that's going to go like so. Turn the water back on, and I'll mix it up as I go, and we're going to have a feed. So when feeding, it's good to not touch the leaves, you know, just direct it to where the roots are. So I'm going to give it plenty of this. So it's going to have the whole watering can. Try and give this plant some food so that it can produce a better crop for me. Indian squash, this is actually quite an old variety from the Oot people of Colorado. You might want to look that one up. But Oot Indian squash, really looking forward to see how this one does. So regarding feeding, when you first start seeing the flowers appear in your container grown plants, your squash and your pumpkins, etc., that could be a good time to start feeding. Now, you're asking me, why, Dan, didn't you feed your container grown plants earlier? So the reason why is I'm actually trying out different growing mediums. So you can see the growing mediums from the other plants I've showed you, apart from this one, the plants looking quite deep green still looking relatively healthy, whereas these aren't. A couple of reasons for this. First one will be because there's 2 squash plants growing in one container, and of course these are hungry plants, they need plenty of nutrients. And the other thing is I'm experimenting with different growing mediums to see how they're doing, or how they will do, and I'm going to be adding to them over time and working on them, so I want to see how they do. So this one here certainly the plants don't look as healthy, so that's why I have chosen to feed. Okay, so pruning vines, again, this is something I don't ever do, but maybe you want to get your plants to concentrate on one fruit to get it bigger. You haven't got that much room, etc. So we'll talk a little bit about it. So what I would do is, once I'm confident that my fruit has set, what I'd do is so once, you know, the fruit had started to swell, don't be too early, because what can happen sometimes is you think you've got a fruit and it hasn't been pollinated properly, it can then fall off. So be careful with that. But once it starts to swell, you're confident it's set, you then maybe would cut your vines, say like a foot and a half or so away from where that fruit is. So what's a foot? It's about 30 centimetres, something like that. And then what you could do is, where the cut is, cover the area with soil, so you're less likely to get, you know, disease into the plant or something like that. So that's something you could look into as well if you wanted. So we'll talk a little bit about harvest and storage of winter squash. So this is straight off the Real Seeds website, so you can look that one up if you want. If handled correctly, they will keep for a long time. For biggest and densest fruit, leave the squash as long as possible on the vine, even after the leaves start to die down, unless there is danger of frost. Harvest by cutting the vine either side of the stem, not cutting the stem itself. Bring inside and store in the warm for 10 days for them to cure. Ideally, this is 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 degrees C. But we just keep ours in the kitchen where it is reasonably warm. Curing like this makes the skin dry out and lets minor damage heal. It really makes them much longer keeping, and they can then be stored at a cool but not cold temperature. Experiments prove that 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees C gives the longest keeping. So there we are, that's all on their website if you want to, you know, look a bit more into that. But anyway, there is more I could say, but this video is probably getting a bit on the long side now. So if you've made it this far, thank you very much. I'm in the process of making a sowing to harvest squash video, and that'll probably be up next year, something like that, around the time we're thinking of sowing our squashes, so squash seeds, pumpkins, etc. So there we are, that's when that will be coming up. But hopefully for the time being, this will sort of satisfy your squash growing needs. Comments, questions, whatever, please feel free to ask them in the description, in the comment section rather, below, and I shall see you all in the next video. Thank you for your time. So 14th of July, and today we're going to talk a little bit about hand pollination of squash plants. So got a squash plant here, variety Hokkaido winter squash, growing in a dustbin. So what you need to do is identify male and female flowers. But I will say, before I start showing you this, I don't actually hand pollinate what I grow. I normally just leave it to pollinating insects to do it for me. But if you want to be extra detailed and you want to be sure of good pollination, it can be a good thing to do. So I'll show you how to do it. So you need to identify male and female flowers. So a male flower doesn't have a fruitlet behind it. So you can see here, this is a male flower. So we've got the stem there straight into a flower. Here once again, stem straight into a male flower. Whereas down here you can see I have 2 female flowers, and a female flower has a fruitlet behind the flower. So you can see what we've got there. We've got the flower, we've got the fruitlet, and we've got the stem. Here once again we've got stem, fruitlet and flower. So they're very easy to identify. So what I'd do is I would get my male flower. So I'll just open that up a little bit, and in the middle there, I hope you can see this, there will be like an organ here, and they'll have pollen on it. And what you'd do is get your paintbrush like this and rub it and get plenty of pollen on your paintbrush. I'm not actually going to use this because I've been using this for painting. It's just to show you what you do. So you rub that on there like that, get plenty of pollen on your paintbrush. And then what I'd do is I'd get my female flower like this, open it up, and I would then find the organ in the middle, which is there. I hope you can see that okay. And I would then rub the pollen onto the organ there. And if you want to be extra strict so that you keep what you're growing true to type, you could then put some string over this flower like this so that no other pollen from any other squash plants etc. can get in there as well. Another option you could also take is to remove the male flower entirely, locate the female flower, and then rub the organ from on the middle of the flower here onto the middle of the organ in the female flower, rub that, and you can do it that way as well. I generally don't like doing that. I quite like to leave my flowers on there to allow the pollinating insects such as bees etc. to do it, but that is an option as well.